Every year, millions of Muslims leave their countries and decide to migrate to places where they are almost welcomed with a red carpet, with healthcare, education, and all their rights guaranteed. However, there are other countries that play it cool, countries where almost no Muslims live, either due to restrictions, social rejection, or reasons you will learn about later. In fact, there is one of these countries that I would dare to say you didn't even know existed, and when you learn more about its history, it will make you reconsider a lot of things. We start our top 10 with South Korea. The idea of a homogeneous society has always been an important pillar. They've worked hard to maintain stability and cohesion, and this has helped the country progress in many ways. However, it has also created a barrier when it comes to diversity. Since there are few everyday interactions with groups like the Muslim community, fear and prejudice easily arise, especially when international media paints a distorted image of who they really are. A good example of this was the reaction of South Koreans when Yemeni refugees arrived in 2018. Instead of responding with knowledge or experience, the fear was based on stereotypes and what they had heard from other places. It was more a fear of the unknown than a rejection of something they truly understood. In Japan, the situation is even more complicated. With a very strict immigration policy, opportunities for Japanese people to interact with Muslims or other religious minorities are almost non-existent. This isolation has caused misconceptions about foreign cultures to keep growing, since people don't have direct access to them. As a result, stereotypes and fears continue to thrive, with no real basis to support them. Japan has created an environment where cultural homogeneity is highly valued, but at the cost of integration and understanding. Without contact with other cultures, prejudices about the other persist, and instead of opening doors to diversity, society remains trapped in a large bubble of distrust. In Central Europe, despite being integrated into the European Union, countries like Poland and the Czech Republic show a strong resistance to Muslim immigration. Although the Muslim presence in both countries is minimal, social rejection remains quite marked, much of which is due to political discourse linking Islam with threats like insecurity or terrorism. In Poland, the rise of nationalist parties has played a significant role in fueling this sense that Muslim refugees are dangerous. However, refugees from Ukraine have received much more support, which creates an obvious contradiction. There is a selective criterion based on what is perceived as culturally acceptable rather than a genuine humanitarian response. Do you think like the Poles? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. In the Czech Republic, the rejection of Muslim refugees is even more apparent. In recent surveys, around 2/3 of the population has shown opposition to accepting Muslim refugees. This rejection is not isolated, but is heavily influenced by political and media campaigns that have amplified fears about Islam, portraying it as something that doesn't fit with the Czech national identity. The problem here is that, since there is no real coexistence with these communities, it's not easy to dismantle such prejudices. Restrictive public policies emerge from this unfounded fear. But what's really at stake is how these societies are built from collective imaginaries, not direct experiences. Cultural homogeneity thus becomes a point of reference for opposition, and prejudices turn into the norm. Hungary and Slovakia represent a different level of resistance, one where nationalism not only originates in society, but is directly integrated into the architecture of the state. In Hungary, the government has openly launched campaigns that associate Muslim immigration with terrorism, social chaos, and the loss of cultural identity. This context is not accidental. It's part of a political strategy designed to consolidate internal support by building an external enemy. The conflict arises when this state rhetoric turns into concrete policies that reject refugee quotas proposed by the European Union and reinforce a closed stance toward any Muslim migration flow. Slovakia follows a similar line, though from a different narrative, a historically Catholic country where Islam is perceived as culturally incompatible. The 2015 refugee crisis deepened this sentiment, creating an environment where political leaders openly declared their refusal to accept Muslim refugees. The context reveals that these positions are not based on failed integration experiences, but on discourses that feed on identity fear. Therefore, institutional nationalism in both countries turns immigration policy into a symbol of cultural defense rather than a humanitarian or economic tool. And here comes the country you probably don't know, where the scenario changes dramatically compared to countries where rejection of Muslims is silent or symbolic, becoming direct, structural, and systematic. In Myanmar, Muslims, especially the Rohingyas, have faced decades of discrimination and persecution. During British colonial rule, Muslims migrated to the Rakhine state, creating tensions with the local Buddhist population. Over the years, the Rohingyas have been considered foreigners, facing denial of citizenship, restrictions on movement, prohibitions on marriage, and limited access to education, healthcare, and employment. These historical dynamics culminated in the military operations of 2016 and 2017. After an attack by an armed Rohingya group on security posts, the Burmese army responded with massive violence, including killings, village burnings, rapes, and indiscriminate persecution. As a result, more than 700,000 people fled to Bangladesh in a forced exodus that the international community has described as acts of ethnic cleansing and possible crimes against humanity. The conflict does not stem from a supposed lack of coexistence between communities, but from a state structure that legitimizes exclusion, fuels nationalist discourses portraying Muslims as an internal threat, and allows violence to be carried out with impunity. The religious and ethnic context of Russia is diverse, especially in regions like the North Caucasus, where Islam is part of the historical identity of republics like Chechnya, Dagestan, and Ingushetia. However, outside of those areas, the social perception changes drastically. In the big cities, where the Muslim population has grown through internal migration and the arrival of workers from Central Asia, a conflict rooted in discourses that link Islam to extremism or insecurity arises. This conflict intensified after violent episodes in the 1990s and 2000s, leaving a deep mark on public memory. The subsequent context was marked by stricter control policies and the expansion of security measures, especially in areas with a significant Muslim population. These measures are officially justified as necessary to maintain stability, but they also reinforce perceptions that equate ordinary religious practices with potential risks. Therefore, the line between legitimate surveillance and collective stigmatization becomes blurred, creating an environment where many Muslims face controls, prejudices, and expanded surveillance without distinguishing individual behavior. In China, the situation takes on a different, though no less concerning form. In the Xinjiang region, the Uyghur population and other Muslim groups face an omnipresent surveillance system supported by advanced facial recognition technologies, data analysis, and digital control. This is coupled with restrictions on everyday religious practices, such as fasting during Ramadan, wearing traditional clothing, or teaching the Uyghur language, along with re-education campaigns involving detentions in facilities officially described as vocational training centers. Although the state narrative maintains that these measures aim to combat extremism and ensure national security, their disproportionate reach goes far beyond terrorism prevention. In practice, they become tools of cultural, political, and religious control that profoundly transform the lives of millions and create forced homogenization with lasting repercussions on the identity and cohesion of these communities. And the number one spot goes to North Korea, which is determined by a political system that eliminates any form of religious plurality. The state is defined through an official ideology that combines elements of Juche, party leadership, and the ruling dynasty. In this environment, any practice of faith, including Islam, is considered a direct threat to the cohesion of the regime. The conflict does not arise from social tensions with religious minorities, as these practically do not exist, but from a state structure that considers any belief as a form of dissent. International reports indicate that the country maintains absolute control over religious expression and applies severe punishments to those who practice unauthorized beliefs. The context is further exacerbated by a lack of access to independent information and constant surveillance. In this scenario, a Muslim, if one exists, would face the same extreme conditions as those facing adherents of other forbidden religions. The absence of religious freedom is reinforced through sanctions, re-education, and ideological control. But this control extends beyond the doctrinal to encompass daily life, personal relationships, and any form of organization that escapes the state's power. Therefore, North Korea represents the most extreme degree of hostility, where not only is a religion rejected, but the very idea of spiritual freedom is suppressed. The truth is that the acceptance of Muslims is a very delicate topic because it is also very subjective. Everyone has their own opinion, and it is completely valid to express it as long as it is done respectfully. If I were to govern a country, and this topic were up to me, I would eliminate illegal immigration and set a series of requirements for anyone wishing to come to the country. Now, tell me in the comments, what would you do? Would you allow immigrants? Would you not allow them? The truth is, I'm really curious about your opinion. I'll read your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be part of this great family. Have a great day.